This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you, Brian. We'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 1:33. First item on the list is public comments. Are there folks from the public who would like to be heard at this time? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and move on to review and approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to move resolution number 1 to approve the minutes from December?
So moved.
Thank you, Vicki. I'll go ahead and second. All right. Are all those in favor? Say aye.
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 Any nays? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. All right, moving along, we're going to review now the Clean Energy Jobs Report, and we have folks here from BW Research to go through very excellent Connecticut Clean Energy Industry Report.
All right.
Take it away.
Well, thank you, Brenda. Thank you for that. So yeah, we do have Philip and Sarah on the line. Give me 1 second and I'll reintroduce them. All of you know them, but just wanted to comment at the top that we just wrapped up our second Connecticut Clean Energy Industry Report. We had a webinar in February. Really want to thank our utility colleagues for being great partners with us on this for the last couple of years. It feels like this is becoming a pretty regular piece of work for this joint committee, and obviously with respect to jobs, it's a very important piece for all of us. So what we wanted to do today was, and I'm going to ask Glenn if he could tee up the next slide. Glenn, these are your notes in terms of some of the things you'd like to see, so just giving you a heads up. We wanted to initiate a conversation around some potential additions that we could do to this report. So we do have Philip and Sarah here with us who have a few thoughts, and we'll present those. And the goal is to really get feedback from the Joint Committee and guidance in terms of how we might think about additional work. The data that is now compiled into the existing reports is being made available by the Department of Energy. So that's freed up some resources for us to do other things that might allow us to dig deeper in certain areas. So with that, let me turn it to Glenn, just in terms of some of the things the CLNM is thinking about in terms of additional opportunities for consideration, and then we'll turn it to Philip and Sarah.
Thank you, Brian. I'll also encourage the companies to speak up too in the context of the 3-year plan. Thank you for putting these bullets together. You know, I'll make a couple of overall comments that touch on several of these points. You know, in developing, and for those who've had the opportunity to actually review the 3-year plan, which, as a reminder, and this is discussed in more detail when we get to the discussion about the 3-year plan. The plan is still under review by DEEP, so the plan is not yet final. We do have an initial approval on the budget, but regarding the text and the specifics of the program and the 3-year activities, that is still under review by DEEP, and we are awaiting a tentative determination and conditions of approval. And that's a preface to my broader comment that one of the areas that's been a topic of discussion, both as part of the plan development and subsequently, is the appropriate role for fuel switching, but more specifically for electrification and heat pumps. That continues to be a topic of discussion with final direction. I'll say still somewhat undetermined. However, the plan does speak to the need to prepare the market for that likely eventuality, which gets to the first point. So developing the proper skill sets, both in terms of skill sets specific to heat pumps, but also ensuring that we have an adequate contractor size to meet that growing need. Electrification is obviously part and parcel with heat pumps, and important to note that we're talking not only for space heating, but given that water heating, at least in the residential sector, is the second largest in use, the opportunity for heat pump water heaters, which then gets to a possibly expanded definition of the HVAC industry to include plumbers and by extension electricians, becomes important. Health and safety remediation has been a challenge and opportunity we've been struggling with for some number of years. We've had assorted limited buckets of funding. We will continue to identify and assess and implement fundings, and DEEP is in the process of hiring a weatherization program operator for additional funding that is being made available for health and safety remediation. But we continue to have to turn away, upwards of 20% or more of low-income weatherization opportunities because of that. So that continues to be important. Multifamily, is always an opportunity, and particularly given that higher percentages of low moderate income customers are in multifamily buildings, and that also contains the challenge of ensuring proper integration between our residential and commercial industrial programs, which by and large the companies have done quite well. And I think I'll stop at this point. We can circle back around if necessary, but I think that may be a sufficient overview, and I'll ask Steve or others who are on the phone if they want to add anything from the company perspective.
That was good, Glenn. We had a chance to kind of go through this, and we thought those areas would be worthwhile if possible in the next go around. But yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for setting that context, Glenn. We'll turn it now to our steadfast contractors and Philip and Sarah of BW Research, who you all know have been just great help to us over the last couple of years, and are just going to put up a few prompts to get us to have a conversation. And Philip and Sarah, with that background as context from Glenn, feel free to just kind of add some context as you put forth this concept. So I'll turn it over to you.
Terrific. Thanks so much, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be working with you in Connecticut. We're really, excited to see some of the supplemental research areas that you're interested in. I think I'm hearing somebody typing. It's just sort of that. Thank you. That's great. So we want to talk about 6 different areas that we've worked on with other states and have some experience with that we think may be helpful in terms of the prior conversation we just had. So we've done a number of these analyses in neighboring states. So in Massachusetts, some in Rhode Island, New York, Vermont, and have had good success in terms of being able to provide a deeper look at some of the information and really getting into some of those questions around electrification and sort of an accelerated transition to clean electricity and sort of climate policies. So these are the 6 listed here. I don't need to read them off to you, but they're basically sort of understanding exactly what we were just discussing. So what does it look like in terms of the numbers of people who need to be hired in order to install and maintain and manufacture and ship and sell and do all the other things that are connected to the deployment of those technologies? Which technologies are there? What does the mapping look like? I use Connecticut as an example a lot. For an example, in water and wastewater occupations, and Connecticut has a much higher representation of workers of color in the water and wastewater sector than surrounding states. And through some GIS mapping work, we were able to see that the training and the facilities are more accessible to public transportation that also service communities that have higher or greater concentrations of populations of non-white populations. So, being able to look at some of those pieces, right? So where are the resources? Where are the training centers? Where are the job sites? And where do people live that we're interested in getting employed? Where are the unemployed folks? Where are the underemployed folks? Where are the priority populations? Stakeholder engagement is obviously an important element. We can talk about that in terms of some work we've done, particularly in New Jersey. Workforce pathways is a big one. There we're really looking at some of the transition elements and sort of how to think about, where are you going to get the workers that you need given the current labor force participation? And then are there any sort of careers where people may lose their jobs or have their jobs change substantially and will need new skills, right? And so the HVAC example is a good one. And I will tell you that in the work that we've done in states all around Connecticut, what would seemingly be a fairly simple install of a heat pump water heater versus an electric or gas fired is often done incorrectly by plumbers who are not familiar with the differences. And it can be something as simple, and it usually is, as properly installing a condensate pipe and making sure that it's routed appropriately, not into a septic, etc. Those types of issues are fairly easy to resolve, but if you don't, you end up with lots of flooded basements or ruined septic tanks, right? So those are the types of things that we're looking for, that level of detail, right? And some of the workforce skills analyses. And then finally, an area that we wanted to touch on is priority populations, which is language we're borrowing from NYSERDA in New York, where they're very interested in specific populations of workers and understanding, so this could include, women in the trades, returning veterans, formerly incarcerated individuals, people living in frontline environmental justice communities, minority and women-owned business enterprises, right? All these different sort of groups that we think about in terms of ensuring sort of equity and access to opportunity. I think in the next series of slides, we have a little bit more detail on each one. So I'll just touch on these, and then probably what I'll do is, Sarah has led a lot of these studies for us in neighboring states. So I'll probably just turn over for some, examples or context. I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to make sure that we give you a good sense of what we're talking about. So if we take the heat pump example that the committee was just discussing, that would be an example of sort of a technology sector deep dive. And so there we would be, essentially conducting research and outreach with current, HVAC firms, with program administrators, with utilities, right, to really understand what are the workforce needs, what kind of policies would be helpful to increase adoption, customer acquisition. There's some around sort of operating and business, some around workforce, some around other sort of components. Diversity initiatives is another one that's been sort of an interesting recent series of requests. And then we just give some options, so the ones that are most frequently we're asked about are offshore wind, building efficiency and electrification more generally, specific deep dives into heat pumps, really mostly focused around air source heat pump heating and water heating, and electric vehicles. And so that's really sort of like you imagine this project is a survey-based effort that's looking at, quantifying the number of jobs. The technology sector deep dive is really doing a supplemental survey with those types of respondents and really understanding in a deeper sense what the kind of the needs of the business community are in the workforce. That's different from an economic impact model, which is really where we are looking at a series of policies or practices that would go into place and how that would increase, decrease, or change various segments of the Connecticut economy. So that can be a really big effort. So in New York, we led the Just Transition Working Group study that looked at the 2050 impacts of the CLCPA, which is their climate law. Massachusetts, we're looking at a 2030 assessment. for the, for staying on pace for implementing their 2045 law for climate. It can also be much narrower and look at very specific policies and programs around, certain number of homes that have that become electrified, or certain sectors policies around decarbonization or tax credits. So obviously this is about projections. This is about understanding future demand and knowing where to invest resources by sort of how the differences by technology, by industry sector, and by occupation. So we can go to the next slide. I know this is a lot of information. I know I'm going quickly, so hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions. So the mapping, I sort of already talked about that, but sort of understanding, where's the training network, where are the jobs, and where are the people. A lot of times we're looking at race, ethnicity, income, education level, those sort of key metrics that people think about with demographic mapping. And then resource mapping, we're looking at, where are there federal and state programs or like laboratories maybe that are receiving federal funds or state funds. Where are there sort of wraparound services? Are there opportunities for career advancement in that geographic region? And then are there programs for specific communities? This has generally been focused around, it started as sort of just a general resource mapping, which can be really helpful. It's increasingly had an equity focus as interviews have identified that there are these barriers to participation for certain communities. And so it's been really helpful in terms of reducing or eliminating those barriers. For stakeholder engagement, this is really sort of a policy focus. So we're supporting the governor of New Jersey established a Green Jobs Council. The honorary co-chair is the First Lady, and it's all of the cabinet level secretariats in the state government, as well as a number of other leaders who are really focused around understanding sort of which policies can best get the state to meet their climate goals and create good, equitable opportunities and growth across the state. And a lot of what that focus will be is, how do you design strategies that work for the business community, that work for labor unions, that work for frontline communities, that work for college graduates, that work for people who don't go to college, right? There's all different types of stakeholder groups, ratepayer advocates, all types of other folks who are really interested in these questions, and getting a deeper level of sort of their needs, making sure there's a container for the discussion, and then developing sort of programs, practices, policies, recommendations, et cetera, in a collaborative format that incorporates a lot of stakeholder engagement is another way that we sort of thought of as being additional research, because we provide sort of, here are some conclusions and takeaways, but then if there's an element of saying, now what do we want to do with these to move them into action, we found that the stakeholder engagement is a really good way to make sure that you get great buy-in and really good ideas that touch on all the important stakeholders throughout the state. All right, one more slide, and then I'll stop talking and we can take questions and then answer any questions about specific projects if you have any. So workforce pathways. So we do some specific occupational assessments in this work. But what we would be really sort of driving into is, who employs them? What types of businesses are they? Are they large businesses? Are they largely small businesses? Are they, in the manufacturing sector? Are they in the, are they minority and women owned? Are they all clustered around Hartford, or are they all clustered around, Stanford, right? Where are these types of businesses? What are the skill sets underlying these sort of different occupations? And so this is where we would dig into this, using the heat pump example. What is sort of a person coming out of a traditional HVAC program and maybe with a few years of doing oil and gas fired boilers and furnaces? What does their skill profile look like, and what are their detailed work activities, and what does their day-to-day look like? And then what are the key differences for installing air source heat pumps, as an example? And what kind of training, right, around refrigerant or other types of training that they might need, manufacturer certifications, et cetera, to be able to fill the gaps that exist from the new technology. And then how does that differ between, you know, smaller, maybe mini splits for residential settings versus larger scale commercial or ducted systems or other types of systems. And there we're really thinking about, you know, in the electrification market, a lot of that is going to be focused around, you know, workforce development organizations, utilities, community organizations, training education providers. Increasingly with, you know, the offshore wind and Connecticut's commitments to offshore wind and some other sectors, you know, probably labor unions would be another group that would be an audience for this kind of work. And then finally, I don't think I need to really go into too much more on the priority populations because we discussed them. But given the increasing focus of the administration in Washington and increasingly with state administrations across the US, a focus around equity and understanding the barriers to entry for specific populations. There are two sort of reasons that we sort of recognize in this work, and then I will pause for questions and additional comments. But one is, you know, there obviously is, as I mentioned, this sort of enhanced focus on equity and making sure that opportunities are equitable and that we're addressing barriers to participation. The other is a little bit more focused on the economics, which is that when you start looking at how the various policies are going to stimulate job creation, there's not a lot of slack in the labor market at the moment, and the labor force participation has not rebounded as quickly as I think economists had hoped coming out of COVID-19. And as a result, the people who have been most impacted by the pandemic and the downturn following it are people who demographically at least do not sort of mirror or reflect workers in the clean energy sector by and large today. And so that's a long way of saying there are folks living in these priority populations and communities that are available to work if the job pays well and has a good pathway for future success. And you're going to need a lot of folks to fill these roles. And so figuring out the priority population is a real economic imperative because it's a population of folks who are available to work. So I think that's what we had, the totality of it. And then I don't know how much time we have for questions, or if anybody would like to know some specific examples, you know, Sarah could go into. But I think with that, I will turn it back over to Brian.
Great. So that was a great overview, and Sarah, feel free to provide additional context. This is the main agenda item for today, so we're going to spend some time. Sarah, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I have some examples of projects in mind, but I was maybe going to give folks some time to ask questions, and maybe we can focus on specific areas of interest instead of, you know, us having the floor for the whole conversation.
Perfect.
I actually have a question. Thank you, Philip, for that overview, and Glenn, I appreciate your comments as well. I might have missed this, but Philip, I was just curious about maybe the breakdown of the number of people, the number of Black and Brown individuals who are workers, maybe frontline or entry-level workers, and the number of managers from mid-level to executive. Will you also be breaking those numbers down?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in the priority populations, one of the things that we're doing is, so one of the challenges we have with the survey as it is now, which is, as Brian mentioned, is the sort of the DOE survey. There are two challenges. One is that because it's a federal agency and it started a federal agency, we track pretty closely to the Census Bureau definitions around race and ethnicity, which are not how most people think about race and ethnicity, right? So like ethnicity, according to the Census Bureau, is you're either Hispanic or Latino or you're not. It's binary, that's it. And then there's race, which is a totally separate thing. And so people often don't know how to respond very well. So we've done a lot of work to try to clear that piece up. The other thing is it's an employer-based survey. So you could ask, we could be talking to somebody who has 150 employees at the location. And we could say, all right, out of those 150 employees, how many are you know, men or women, or gender non-binary other, and they can give us that breakdown. And then we could say, you know, how many of your employees are Black or African American or Hispanic or Latino or any of the other categories, and they can give us a pretty good breakdown. But we can't get anything on intersectionality, and we really can't go deep into your specific question about management, because we'd end up having, you know, a very long survey instrument before we asked a bunch of other questions that are also really important. So we currently don't have it. The priority populations research does two things. It does go deeper with employers, and it also does an employee and a potential employee survey. So those two are really important elements. The first is the employee survey, where that way we can ask someone, you know, like, tell us about yourself, and they can identify as a man, a woman, as a gender non-binary. They can identify as being, you know, African American, Latino, whatever they want to identify as. And then we can get that intersectionality, because someone could report, you know, I am a Black woman, whereas we can't really get that from an employer survey. And secondly, they can talk to us about their roles, how they got there, whether they feel as though they had any barriers to entry, whether they feel as though they have been promoted at a pace that is, you know, commensurate with others in their position, whether they feel, you know, that they work for an inclusive employer. A lot of those types of questions, right, where we can get a more real, I think, answers, as well as a lot more depth. And then we do what's called a potential worker survey, where we go out to folks who, in the general population, who we're trying to measure, have they ever thought about a career in clean energy, why or why not, and what their perceptions are of the industry, if they're aware of any training, you know, what would make it attractive to them, why they haven't pursued that kind of a thing, or if they thought it was for them. All those types of questions, that we can understand, are there either sort of awareness barriers, or are there perception issues that we need to resolve to make sure that the industry is an attractive place for people from with different backgrounds. So that's sort of the focus of the priority population. So the idea is, on the priority population deep dive, we would get that level of granularity overall, and, you know, for some of the larger classifications like renewables or energy efficiency.
Thank you for that.
Sure thing.
Hi, this is
I'd like
Lonnie.
to, sorry.
Oh, I'm just going to ask a quick question. So a few years ago, I think we worked with manufacturing and through the community colleges to develop some mobile units that took training into communities, you know, that we were really targeting. Not quite sure how that all turned out, given the ups and downs of everything, but it just feels like that's an opportunity that we might be able to harness. And I'm wondering if you've looked at that and if you're seeing it in any other states.
Yes. So what's interesting is that in most states, the biggest segment of their clean energy economy is around this energy efficiency of buildings, and the biggest growth area in all the modeling we're doing is around efficiency and electrification of buildings. And most states also, in most situations, people really need a car or a driver's license to be able to get the job. So in cases where we have looked at some of these programs, they're very effective in providing training. And we've done some work in the New Orleans area to look at similar things in green infrastructure and solar. But the folks didn't end up really being able to get jobs because they had barriers to getting a driver's license, or barriers to getting an automobile, or getting close enough to be able to do a ride share. So I think it's sort of like a necessary but not sufficient element. And that, what I would sort of suggest we would do if you wanted to go down this route, is that we would sort of discuss those issues, understand what's really happening, and then go that click deeper to then say, what are the barriers that are remaining that could really sort of make it work? Or maybe they already identified those and have workarounds that we could say, this is what needs to be replicated in terms of best practices.
I think, well, this is Lonnie again. I think that's really critical, because this comes up every time we have these discussions and we take it on the road, is how do they get to the jobs? And, you know, we've had a lot of people testify that the commercial transportation just doesn't get it done. And I think fuel cell energy, and one of them actually they paid Uber people to bring their people. I mean, at some point you begin to look at how do you get them there, and that just feels like a critical part of the whole thing. It's a really interesting report. Thank you so much.
Folks, I thought I would jump in and just give, because I know some of this began with some questions about, the approval of the 3-year plan at DEEP and so forth. So we're working very hard on finalizing that, and there's going to be a lot in there about. I'll just give you a little preview. There's going to be a lot in there about workforce and, in particular, barriers to heat pump deployment, including workforce. So this is very timely presentation. Thank you for this. Really appreciate the level of detail on, the types of potential studies that could be done. I want to point out just a couple things. First of all, the utilities, I know Eversource at least, they are working on doing some planning around workforce. So we just want to make sure that whatever they're doing is everybody's aware of, and it's, being coordinated with any additional work that we may want to move forward with. So I just want to, note that. Also, we have Executive Order 21-3, which Governor Lamont is instituting a Clean Economy Council, a Connecticut Clean Economy Council, and some of the proposals here would certainly fit sort of the types of things that we're looking to study within that council. So not to say that any work that we do has to wait for that council, but should certainly, we should make sure that that anything we're doing here is, being incorporated there, and DEEP can provide sort of the connections there. And I believe the Green Bank as well, we can work together on that. The other thing that I just want to note, one of my primary areas of focus, and the thing that I'm thinking about the most, is the overlap between all of our different programs, especially on the building side. And, we now have electric vehicle charging program. We have, a new solar tariff. We have a storage program, and, we want to deploy more heat pumps. How do we coordinate the work, all of our different industries so that they're all working together and rowing in the same direction? And one of the primary use cases, or one of the best use cases for heat pumps, is where you're installing solar and storage. And we want to make sure that our solar developers, our storage developers, are working with our HVAC folks who have been trained on heat pump deployment, so that they're right sizing solar arrays to be able to absorb, the extra usage from a heat pump, for example, which is something that PURA has allowed in advance of the heat pump being installed in their new solar tariff. And so that we're, those who are getting storage on board can also, leverage those storage resources and install a heat pump without, having significant impacts on their load. So I just want to point this out. It makes things more complicated, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. And it's something that I really think we're well positioned in this joint committee to focus on and prioritize.
Vicki, this is Brian. I would just add to your comments in the coordination area. I think in terms of the Clean Economy Council, Vicki, you had recently introduced us to the Office of Workforce Strategy, OWS, which I think is out of the governor's office, is doing a lot of this, and a lot of this broadly across the economy. And when we talked specifically about what was happening in clean energy and the things that the Green Bank is working on, the way I left that conversation was, I feel like we're in good hands. That's their skill. Like, we don't have to worry about it. We just need to connect to it. So I feel like whatever we think about today and the guidance we get today, we're definitely going to want to connect to that activity so that it's complementary and just adds to what's already being done.
I think that's right, Brian. And but I also want to be sure they don't have a lot of staff at the Office of Workforce Strategy. They're fantastic, and they have a lot of connections, and they can help us make connections, but they'll still rely on us. I think, they can provide guidance and some structure perhaps, and incorporate some of what we're doing into what they're doing, but we're still probably going to have a lot of responsibility for for implementation. You know, we want to make sure that we're working very closely in coordination and not sort of reinventing the wheel or doing things that they're already doing, and making sure we're leveraging their existing processes and then identifying gaps that they can sort of help us target with our resources, right? So yes, that's exactly what I think we need to spend a little bit of time doing as we launch the Clean Economy Council, which the Office of Workforce Strategy will be very involved in. So thank you for pointing that out.
All right, so if there, I'm sorry, Brian, I didn't want to steal your thunder. Were you gonna?
No. I'm just let me maybe I'll try to maybe wrap something up. I feel like we get to this point, and we've gotten to this point the last couple of years, but we haven't kind of. I feel like you need to nudge us a little bit more, and that will push me and Philip and Sarah to come forth with an agenda that we could then look at with our utility colleagues and price and work through. There's definitely got to be some of that coordination with OWS and you know, as Vicky's laying out how we think about those sorts of things. But it feels to me like if I could just take a stab, that we're number 1 and number 6 feel like important things to look into, as well as, you know, the access to training that Lonnie is bringing, you know, coming to them or finding ways of bringing them to. So if that's a way of summarizing and you all are okay, then we would work towards a 1 and 6 around, you know, heat pumps, or, you know, let's figure out what the technology is and we'll go at it.
I like that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Vicky.
Sorry, Brenda. You know, I think there's going to be some guidance about this in our decision. I think it's okay to start looking at that, Brian, and like coming up with, you know, ways to do that. But I would also say our draft decision hopefully will be released soon, and there will be some guidance on, you know, so it's really great that we're having this conversation, because this is the type of thing that we'll be looking for and providing some guidance on.
Okay, so then we'll wait for the draft decision, and with Brenda's kind of dual role on both boards, same thing with you, Vicky, we can kind of coordinate from here to there. We'll build a bridge from this slide to that and try to figure out what is complementary and not redundant, but can be helpful, if that works.
Yes, I think it would be helpful, you know, if folks started working with the utilities to understand what they already have underway, and they're, you know, some of this they might be already covering. I know our folks who work on workforce have been meeting with the utilities to find out what they are actually like actively working on. So that might be good early work to start, and so that everybody understands what the utilities have underway already. And then, you know, we can see, you know, what else, you know, we need to prioritize, and that'll give us a little time to finish up and get a draft decision out.
Cool.
I'd also like to recommend that you consider item number 3 as well, because if there's something that we can learn from the water utilities on how to expand and diversify the energy sector, I think that would be great. And I'm all about visual illustrations. I think they make a huge impact.
Perfect. Yeah, such a great example. Okay.
I agree.
So we'll work for 1, 3, and 6, but we'll be guided. We've got just what Vicky said. We'll talk to the EDCs. I think Philip, Sarah, we probably got enough to try to scope something out, like a step-by-step, and then we can coordinate with Brenda in deep on that decision from there too. Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Great.
All right, plugging away here. So we are now, oh, there we go. Agenda item number 5, plan coordination, and I think that's Brian and Glenn.
Perfect. Yeah, so we'll do a green bank review, and then Bert's going to help me out here as well. Then we're going to go to Glenn and the EDCs on the CLNM, and then the DEEP team, Vicky and Shubhita, on the status of the comprehensive energy strategy. So just in terms of the green bank and where we are, we're continuing our transition. As we noted last time, we're still in a transition on a number of things. The first was that we built in a goal, a Justice 40-like goal built around Connecticut's vulnerable communities definition. So by 2025, no less than 40% of investment and benefits to vulnerable communities. For those of you who are kind of steeped in that definition, you know that there are 4 parts to it. Low to moderate income communities, which is generally defined as less than 100% AMI. We've already achieved that goal if that is in fact the definition. The second definition is communities that are eligible for CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, that's less than 80% AMI. We're not at that goal, at that target. I think we're at 32%. This one is the most important part of the definition for us because CRA has to do with how your local financial institutions are investing in the community. And since our main objective is to use a limited amount of public to mobilize more private, that is our focus, is to unlock more private investment. So we dig into that definition. So lots more work to do, 25% more lift to get to the 40%. The third part of that definition has to do with the environmental justice definition underneath General Statutes 22A-20A, which includes DECD distressed communities and environmental justice communities to the federal poverty level statistics. I think we've achieved that goal with those 2 things combined. But anyway, so we're operationalizing that goal with a focus on CRA eligible. We too have been in the transition with the board members. We've successfully onboarded 5 new board members. We recently lost a board member who is now the secretary of OPM. So we are going to be onboarding a new board member this Friday who's the undersecretary for legal affairs for the Office of Policy and Management. So we're continuing to bring on board new board members and excited to do that. The conclusion of the RCIP, we've achieved our 350 megawatt target. We are excited to see where the residential renewable energy solutions program stands. It's great to see where things are in terms of the design of the program, including the requirement to maintain HES and HES-IE as part of the program. You know, that there was a lot of pushback on that, but we wanted to maintain the residential market commitment to that, and PURA's required that in. So to the point that Vicky's raising, you know, trying to make sure that we get cross technology integration is important. We shouldn't be thinking in silos. We should be thinking about how all these technologies touch each other and make sure that we can deliver to those customers. But we're wrapping up the RCIP. Good stuff. You know, it's Connecticut's recognized as a solar with justice state, which essentially means that low to moderate income families and communities of color, Black and Hispanic families are demanding solar PV either on par or greater than non-LMI families and white families. So that's good. If you compared Connecticut's residential market on a per capita basis each year for the last 5 years to every state in the entire Northeast, Connecticut has the greatest watts per capita. And I would argue we probably have the lowest incentive level as well. So we've been very smart and deliberate about how to create and support that market. So we're looking forward to the market continuing forward to deliver, you know, 50 to 60 megawatts a year through the new tariff program. I think we're going to get into a little bit later the battery storage incentive program. I'll ask Sergio to provide that update when we get to the residential sector. But you know, we've launched the program and you know, it's making steady progress. And then lastly, before I turn it to Bert to talk about bonds, we are working to develop our environmental infrastructure aspect of the Green Bank. I'm going to go into more detail after this slide, but let me turn it to Bert on to talk about our Green Liberty notes.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me, Brian?
Perfect, Bert. Yep.
Okay, great. So to support the comprehensive plan, a number of you know that the Green Bank is very active in the bond market. We've since 2014, we've issued about $120 million worth of bonds, with 2/3 of that being in the past 3 years, including the debut of our Green Liberty Bond, which not only lowered the minimum investment to $1,000, but also went to great lengths to verify the green and sustainable aspects of the use of proceeds from the bonds, for the comfort of the investors. Our last bond offering was during Earth Week last year. It attracted nearly $100 million worth of bids for about $25 million worth of bonds, so it was incredibly successful. This year, as Brian was mentioning, we started a program called Green Liberty Notes to designate the short-term one-year nature of the investment versus our bonds. And the design of that is to reach an even smaller dollar investor down to $100, so that truly everyone can be a part of this expanding green economy. This program is being offered every 3 months for up to $250,000 each time we go to market, and that's on a platform called Raise Green. I guess we should send a link in the chat. I'll get to that after I'm finished with these short remarks. And those funds supports Eversource's SBEA program for small business and state and local governments. The Green Bank purchases the loans of the SBEA program with our program partner, Amalgamated Bank. And looking ahead to environmental infrastructure, which Brian will address next, the legislature gave us the ability to issue bonds up to 50 years in duration, which better matches the expected useful life of some of those investments. Back to you, Brian.
Great, thank you, Bert. So just in terms of environmental infrastructure, just wanted to give you a sense of where we are in our timeline. We're making steady progress. Early on, we had to, and it's pretty continuous, seek deep engagement and guidance along the way. You can imagine all three branches, energy, we've dealt with Vicki in the Bureau of Energy Technology and Policy and the energy side of DEEP, since our inception. The new environmental infrastructure allows us to touch base with the other side of the agency, the conservation side and the pollution prevention side. So the DEEP team's been great, giving us guidance all along the way in terms of how to think about the various elements of environmental infrastructure. We've made all of our necessary governance amendments, we believe, in terms of our bylaws, operating procedures, and other things, ethics that we had to work on and adapt to be consistent with the statute. As Bert has noted, in terms of our bonding, 50-year bond potential for environmental infrastructure is a huge tool. And looking at the Green Liberty bonds and Green Liberty note structures can also be looked at with the lens for environmental infrastructure. But we've really been digging into stakeholder engagement for the last 6+ months. We're looking ahead at a strategic retreat next late in April, and hopefully we will be able to pull all these pieces together and pull together a draft, a comprehensive plan for environmental infrastructure to be delivered to the board and its committees in the late May, early June timeframe. But this is how we've kind of broken down the process. We've got cross-cutting priorities. Our mission is to confront climate change. And when you put the vulnerable communities investment target front and center, the 40%, the increasing our resilience against the impacts of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that is the lens upon which we're looking at all the different segments of environmental infrastructure. You can also imagine that clean energy, our clean energy definition is front and center here too. We've got the farm waste to energy project for agriculture that we've been doing at Fort Hill. We've got run of the river hydro projects that we've been working on in Canton, in Putnam, in Meriden. So we deal with small hydro, energy projects, and then of course, food waste to energy with quantum biopower. So from a clean energy perspective, we've been delving in these segments and will continue to do that. But, pulling back from the pure energy but putting on the lens of climate change, we've worked through parks and recreation, land conservation, and agriculture. As I was mentioning earlier to you, Brenda, just coming out of doing a lot of reading today in agriculture, we're looking ahead at water. That will be our next foray into understanding what we can do, and then waste and recycling. So the hope is to come out of these with some recommendations that would make sense for the Green Bank model. These are all the groups that we've been meeting with. Been having a lot of fun understanding different environmental groups out there. A lot of these groups actually use the tool of finance to advance the green economy, which is where we want to be using the Green Bank model. So it's fun. Ashley, Stewart, and I have been having meetings with all these groups, and we're halfway there. So it's been a lot of fun just doing this and learning a lot of new things. But hopefully we'll be able to pull the pieces together with the guidance of our board and our staff and all these stakeholders to come up with a comprehensive plan that makes sense. So that's kind of where we are. You know, it's kind of energy all full speed ahead, and we'll get an update at the tail end here on where we are. But next to that is this emerging area for the Green Bank. Happy to take any questions before we go to Glenn and the team. Okay. Turn it to Glenn.
Thank you, Brian. So before we get into specifics on the 3-year plan, the next slide's good, thank you. Just want to give a few updates on what's happening at the Energy Efficiency Board. You know, a few notable things. First, I'll start by saying that over the last 2-3 months, we've had 4 new board members join. 2 of these are individuals who filled existing vacancies or already legislatively constituted board membership slots. But in addition, there are 2 new slots that were filled, specifically a low-income representative, while we've often had the residential board member, often with that hat on too, we now have a specific low-income representative on the board. In addition, we also now have a municipal representative on the board. So we are now at full speed with, I believe, 12 members. And given that we have this sudden influx of new members, the technical consultants working with board leadership and with the companies are in the process of scheduling and putting together a 4-session new member onboarding, which is planned for a little later this spring. We've never done a formal onboarding process before, but we think it would be useful and helpful to provide context and background to the new members. And in fact, we may also reach out to the Green Bank when we're putting together the financing sections for this onboarding. So we will follow up offline once we have a better sense as to when that will occur. Finally, I want to note that the board has gone out to bid to procure a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant to assist the board in its efforts to ensure that the programs are more inclusive, and as we'll talk in just a moment, better serve underserved and underrepresented and under-resourced communities and populations. That process is fairly far along, and we're hoping and expecting, depending upon the specifics with contracting, that team will be on board sometime this spring. Any questions on that before I get into the 3-year plan development process? Okay, thank you. We've repurposed this slide a few times, continue to believe it's important to remind us all as to what the plan priorities were, and much of what was developed in the several hundred-page document was with these 3 overall plan priorities as the lens through which we pursued the individual programmatic activities as well as customer and community outreach. Energy affordability, acknowledging that the cost to consumers and businesses of energy is an important consideration, and we need to find and explore all possible ways to reduce that burden. Assisting in reaching the state's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals is also clearly a critical component of what the EDCs do as a benefit of the efficiency programs and demand response efforts that they implement. And then finally, equity, as noted earlier, ensuring that the services that are being offered through the EDC's program are available to all households, to all consumers, and to all businesses, particularly focusing on those in underserved and under-resourced communities. Next slide, please. So some high-level highlights. As noted, the plan is still in review by DEEP, but I think the bullets here stand regardless as to what we will hear back from DEEP. The plan sets the stage for electrification, and from what we heard from Vicki, we may be getting more specifics in terms of more specific direction as to the level of commitment on electrification in the 3-year plan. For both residential and CNI, and this is more specific obviously to the electric programs than to the gas ones, there is a transition and an accelerating one away from lighting savings in the residential sector. It's largely gone in the CNI sector. It continues to be an opportunity, but the level of sophistication in which we're pursuing our lighting savings, going from lamps to fixtures to network lighting, ensures deeper and more comprehensive savings, but more generally and overall, there will be a growing and increased focus on non-lighting savings opportunities. As part of that, to the next bullet, increased multi-fuel perspective, some of that potentially coming from greater emphasis on electrification, but also within the CNI sector, a growing recognition that there are opportunities for delivered fuel savings. Those have long been pursued in the residential sector programs, but much less so in CNI. That is now a greater part of the 3-year plan. Demand response has always been a key component of the EDC's efforts, being often co-marketed with efficiency, but in some cases being promoted on its own. Those activities will continue to grow both in the CNI and the residential sector, including investigating opportunities for gas demand response in addition to the more traditional electric demand response programs. As noted by several parties, including our more lengthy discussion earlier this afternoon, workforce development is a key and critical component of what the plan needs to address, because if we are in fact going to be pursuing electrification opportunities in earnest, we have to make certain that this necessary sized workforce is in place and that the necessary skill sets in that workforce are fully developed. And then finally, but in some ways maybe even most importantly, a continued need to focus and come up with workable solutions to ensure that underserved and burdened customers and communities are being adequately served by the programs. Next slide, please. All right. So going to go through where we are with the plan process. Previously in December, the companies had filed their plan, on or about November 1st. Moving out forward on December 22nd, there was an initial determination by DEEP providing a budget approval, but as I noted earlier, this was a budget approval. DEEP has not yet gone into the specifics of the plan text, the program designs, the savings goals, etc. And as Vicki noted earlier, that process is well underway, so we're expecting to hear fairly soon from DEEP regarding a tentative determination and conditions of approval. On March 1st, the companies filed their update. Just a reminder, we do a 3-year planning cycle with annual plan updates. As part of that annual plan update, we also effectively do a refiling in March. At that point, we know the actual expenditures for the prior program year, and we're able then to make adjustments to budgets to deal with any over or under budgets by sector that are carried forward into the program year, and then adjust the savings goals accordingly. And the companies completed that filing for both gas and electric on March 1st. So those are 2 dates that have come and gone. As noted, we're awaiting drafts from DEEP on the tentative determination and conditions of approval. The typical process has been, and DEEP can certainly correct me here if I misspeak, there will be the opportunity for public comments. It's more than likely that the board will also provide comments on the tentative determination, and then ultimately, based upon feedback, DEEP will issue a final determination. So it barely seems that we have the opportunity to catch our breath with the current 3-year plan cycle and the 2022 plan update when we begin our engagement for the 2023 plan update. And this is what I will refer to as an approximate timeline. Some of these dates are a little bit to be determined, but this is probably a reasonable approximation of the activities that will be undertaken starting late spring going into the fall of this year. Initial engagements by the companies and consultants, public input sessions being held in the summer to get public input. We found that particularly in this most recent 3-year plan development, there was very active engagement, much more so than in the past, and we will certainly work to continue that level of engagement with the public and stakeholders to get their thoughts, as to the 2023 plan update. The committees and board will review and discuss drafts of the plan text. It's likely, though not certain, that at the September board meeting, the board will vote on the plan text. And in parallel to the plan text activities, though often lagging by a month or so, the committees and boards will review and discuss the substance of the plan update in terms of the savings, budgets, and performance management incentives. And typically, though not always, that's voted on at the following board meeting in October. It'll be October 12th of this year. And assuming all goes as planned, the companies will then file, on or before November 1st, their 2023 plan update. Any questions on the 3-year plan or the 2023 plan development process? Okay, thank you. Steve, if you'd like to do this, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to continue. Do you want to give me the opportunity to?
You're doing great, Glenn. Keep going.
Thank you. Just didn't want to hear after the fact, oh, how come you didn't let me speak? Okay. So a high-level summary of the of the 3-year plan. When I talk informally to people, I talk about our $750 million energy efficiency investment. That's a ever so slight hyperbole on my part. It's a little bit short of that over the 3 years, but it's pretty darn close. It's $708 million. So just a little shy of $750 million. It's fairly significant monies. You can see here the total return on our investment, almost $2.50 for every dollar invested in energy efficiency and demand response. Fairly substantial electric lifetime savings. These are just become really big numbers, a little hard to establish context, when your average utility bill is a few hundred kilowatt hours a month. We're going to be saving over the lifetime of all the measures installed 4.8 billion kilowatt hours. Natural gas savings of 21.3 billion cubic feet. Also note the oil savings here. We're talking millions or tens of millions of gallons, and some non-trivial amount of propane savings too. As noted previously, most of our delivered fuel savings have historically been from the residential sector. That does continue, into the 3-year plan, though we begin to start nibbling at the opportunities for delivered fuel savings in the C&I sector too. And then finally note, if you could just go back, that very last line, in addition to all of the energy we saved, we also bring about fairly significant demand reduction through both a combination of our efficiency activities and our active demand response. So this demand reduction includes both active demand response and the passive demand savings that accrue from undertaking our efficiency activities. Next slide, thank you. All right. Here's an annual year by year breakout. The numbers are somewhat similar year to year. Our budgets do drop in part because we've become a little bit of a victim of our own success, to the extent that our electric budgets are largely but not entirely tied to a per customer charge. As consumption falls, some of our collections falls. Or there are also other pools of money that are accessed for the electric budget. And in total, our budgets for both gas and electric are between $230 and $245 million a year, getting to that $708 million that we had seen previously. Electric savings, in terms of energy, continue to fall. And I say continues, so is that not that the efforts themselves have necessarily been reduced, but some of the easier savings that we had talked about from lighting do diminish over time, and the cost rates for other savings tend to be greater than that for lighting. So through a combination of both declining electric budgets and potentially higher cost rates, at least for certain programs, the electric savings will fall somewhat. And I think I'll just leave it at that, but before I go, as opposed to trying to walk through each of the columns here, I'll ask if there are any specific comments about the numbers here. Okay, all right. And I guess I will say that even though electric efficiency savings, the gigawatt hours do decline, our peak demand savings stay about constant and actually do increase slightly. And most of that is from the active demand response activities. Our passive demand savings, I believe, do decline, but that's compensated for by the increase in active demand savings through our demand response efforts. Okay, thank you. All right. So this slide is largely repurposed from our December slide, and we should probably commit to a better follow-up, and I'm not you know, I'm putting this more on us, not on the Green Bank. You know, there were some initial discussions, but you know, collectively, you know, we should think about how best to follow up on these opportunities. And I'll note that, you know, Vicki also talked about some of these opportunities specifically when you get down, you know, to the opportunity to pair heat pumps with PV and potentially storage. You know, that is the penultimate outcome we would like to see when working with customers, that they not only undertake the efficiency activities, but we also move forward with electrification, heat pumps, and storage. It will not be easy, but there are opportunities to work jointly with the Green Bank and others to pursue that outcome. And we should also, you know, similarly consider if there are opportunities in working with the Green Bank to ensure that storage and renewables are integrated into new construction all-electric offers. There is already a standing all-electric new construction offer. A C&I one is under development. You know, related to that, Passive House has become more front and centered for the company's single family and particularly multifamily efforts. And Passive House, while not being specific to all electric new construction, tends to lend itself very well to it because of the low loads, and as a result, heat pumps and potentially PV and storage also become good outcomes for that too. And then I certainly by no means meant to skip the first bullet. You know, the Green Bank has been active here, and we continue to need to discuss opportunities as to how best to improve our financing options, of which we have several for home energy solutions, and maybe of a greater challenge to the income eligible populations to address not only efficiency, but as noted here, health and safety barrier mitigation. You know, we have had historically limited incentive dollars here. We have had some availability, but also somewhat constrained on financing. So this is an area we need to continue to address, because unless we find a way to overcome these health and safety barriers, we will not be able to fully weatherize these homes, and which will continue to be a challenge for the EDCs to meet their 80% weatherization goal by 2030. Any comments or questions at this point on the CLNM program in coordination with Green Bank activities before we turn this over to the Deep to talk about?
I'd like to maybe pause on questions as we're coming close to our time. So
sure, that's fine.
If there are any questions for Glenn, perhaps we can ask them offline or reach out to folks at the Green Bank to relay those over.
Right. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Yep. All right, so we're going to move on ahead to the CES update from Vicki. Great to see you, Vicki.
Hi, Brenda. Thank you. So I'll just do this really quickly because I know we have more things on our agenda that we want to cover, and we have a website that we can send people to. I can drop it in here so that they can read our notices with, you know, if they're interested in more detail. But there basically are two things underway with the comprehensive energy strategy. So in January, we issued a notice of proceeding and a scoping meeting, and we held a technical meeting on the scope, and we sought public comment. Pardon me. The public comment was due on February 17th. I'm sorry, the scoping meeting was on February 17th. I'm looking for the comment due date, but the comments were already due March 3rd. And we've been reviewing them and working on the scope. So stay tuned for us to release a full scope of the comprehensive energy strategy. I will say we have various areas of focus, but building decarbonization is one of our areas of focus. Then also, we just recently on March 18th released a notice of technical meeting and request for written comment on hydrogen opportunities. And we're moving quickly here because of some opportunity at the Department of Energy to provide information in response to requests for information that they have, and to potentially coordinate with other states on a regional hydrogen hub that we would bid in potentially to the Department of Energy. So if any folks here have interest in weighing in on that, we are going to have a technical meeting on April 6th at 10 a.m. on Zoom. And we are also looking for folks who might want to participate in that technical meeting. And if anybody has an interest or wants to refer this out to anybody who might have an interest in participating in that technical meeting, we're looking for people to let us know by March 25th. So we want to look at potential end uses of hydrogen fueled energy, technical issues, what does the state need to do to create an ecosystem supportive of hydrogen that's consistent with our decarbonization goals, discussion of readiness of our workforce, relevant to what we were discussing earlier, and how we can prepare our workforce, discussion of the ways that hydrogen opportunities can be pursued equitably so that we're maximizing benefits in EJ communities and reducing burdens of air pollution, climate change, or energy affordability on disproportionately impacted communities, and any other issues that we should be considering as a state as we move forward engaging with DOE on hydrogen opportunities. So I'll provide a link in the chat just to our CES website so that people can read these notices in more detail and get any more information that they may want there.
Thank you, Vicki. I just also want to make a quick note that I'll have to jump off right at 3, so Brian will take over at that point if we're still on. So moving on to legislative update, Matt.
Hey folks, good afternoon. Here's a sampling of bill proposals of possible interest for the 2022 regular session. DOG's still in the running as of the committee process, starting to winnow down those ideas in the pipeline. I envision this as a conversation, given who has what helpful information. It's going to be time limited here, so I'm only going to highlight just a few of these. Number 10 codifies the governor's 2040 target for a zero carbon electric sector, kind of a master policy that affects a lot of downstream policies and activities that are performed in service to it. Yesterday, that passed the Energy and Technology Committee. Numbers 14 and 5041, these are building energy labeling standards. Number 14 regards owner-occupied properties and is a moving target. It actually hasn't passed the insurance committee yet. In yesterday's meeting, they said they have no additional plans for future meetings, but 9 bills remaining and more on the calendar. So they seem to be potentially scheduling a meeting tomorrow for that one. So Governor's Bill 14 may still move out. 5041 for renters perhaps has stronger legs. It already passed the House in committee over a week ago. Number 90, consultant and procurement authority for DEP. Despite the bill title, the Energy Committee in passing it out yesterday took away the may hire consultants part regarding comprehensive energy strategy. I don't know if Deep has any color on that. I have 2 other things I would mention about that bill.
I can jump in there. Yeah, it's a little disappointing, but there's probably, I think that in the near term, we're going to be able to hire consultants. But one of the reasons that we did not hire consultants to do modeling for our comprehensive energy strategy in this iteration is because we don't have the ability to fund the consultants the same way that we do through the IRP mechanism. So we did think that was important, but we're glad to be moving forward with the storage procurement fixes that we needed at least.
And that procurement is enabled in various forms, but it looks like the language change for what was originally proposed and what passed yesterday kept the same intent, but kind of narrowed down the more prescriptive language describing the intent behind it. But I interpreted the simpler language as being inclusive of that same empowerment for DEEP, right? So that's good, and added reporting language on battery recycling and stewardship. That might have been spliced from another bill. So that had passed energy yesterday. I think you've heard about CPACE before, passed the committee number 93 with strong support yesterday. Only a technical change to the bill proposal. Allows for financing of property resilience improvements and resilience and EV charging infrastructure improvements to receive financing outside of CPACE's savings to investment tests, given they have localized costs but socialized benefits, supporting broader policy. 292. 2024 state building codes amended to prohibit the use of any electric resistance or fossil fuel combustion system as the primary source of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or water heating in new residential construction or major alterations of residential buildings. Pretty big and probably pertinent to this joint committee here, as well as a deep lead training and education program in service to that policy. That passed the Housing Committee and appears to now be on the Senate calendar.
I'll just jump in here, Matt, and say Senator Lopes is showing a lot of leadership in his in shepherding this bill through. So, yeah.
That's great. I think he was the champion for 395 last year, the affordable multifamily.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I should be allowing for any additional time here, or if there's any bills that others want to jump in on. I mean, 176, it's pretty notable. Expands the shared clean energy facilities program, and as of yesterday, passing Energy Committee in its updated bill form, also doubled the non-residential tariff program capacity cap and allows for larger projects there, 2 megawatts to 5 megawatts. So more commercial projects. Back to the SCEF side. More program capacity there with 25 megawatts, greater LMI targets, EJ community pledges, and roof space maximization language. So why don't I stop right there, and folks could direct me if there's any remaining seconds on the clock in terms of points of curiosity.
I would also just jump in, and you may have said this, I'm sorry if you did. I think that on the residential energy labeling, you know, my read is that the renter bill has probably more legs at this point. But, you know, again, we're seeing some, I think, leadership in the Housing Committee on that. So, but still pushing forward with both at this point. And we had a nice event earlier this week that some folks here attended. So good to see that moving forward.
It was wonderful. And we'll learn more in the next 24 hours with regard to the owner-occupied one. Thanks, folks.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Vicki. All right, so we are closing in here. Other business with Steve, Joel, Mackie, or Sergio.
All right, who wants to start us off on Resi single family?
All right, let me do this piece, Brian. Hello, everyone. This is Sergio Carrillo. I'm Director of Incentive Programs with the Green Bank. And I wanted to take a couple minutes to provide a very quick update on the Energy Storage Solutions Program. Since there has been an unprecedented and an unexpected interest in the program from both residential and industrial or non-residential customers. In 60 days, in just 60 days, the program launched January 1st. We have received 31 non-residential incentive applications for more than 53 megawatts of storage capacity. 53 megawatts. This is our 3-year target. And in just 60 days, we got there. It's been incredible. On the residential side, we have received 40 applications, totaling roughly 500 kWs, half a megawatt of storage capacity. This is understandable, much smaller systems, so 500 kWs. We've been collaborating with the EDCs. We're moving things along. Everything is going well so far. So we are very glad of with the progress we have made. Is there any questions related to battery storage? All right, so let's talk about the areas of collaboration. On the residential single family side, as Brian mentioned before, the requirement for HES and HESIE in both residential renewable energy solutions program, which is the tariff program, and the energy storage solutions program. Both programs launched January 1st of this year. From a Smarty perspective, a couple things. The upcoming special offer for renewable heat and cooling in the spring and summer of this year. In the next slide, Joe Bonanata is going to provide some metrics on the deployment of air source and ground source heat pumps, and also the Smarty expansion into environmental infrastructure. So that's what we have from a single family, residential single family. Joe, do you want to cover the heat pump?
Sure. Thanks, Sergio.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joe Bonanata of the Inclusive Prosperity Capital. For the Smarty loan financing program, this slide just shows heat pump volume, comparison of both air source and ground source heat pumps deployed through the program over the last 2 full years and this partial year. So we've really seen quite an increase in air source heat pump volume over the last several years, as well as an increase in ground source heat pumps. Last year alone, we had 50% of our full Smarty loan program volume was tied to air source heat pumps, either projects that were solely air source heat pumps, ductless or ducted mini splits, or just traditional air source heat pumps, or some sort of combination of a heat pump and another measure. So lots of interest. It's also important to note that in starting July 2020 through July 1st, 2021, we had a special financing offer in the market. So we had a 1.99% interest rate buy down program with utilizing federal American Recovery and Reinvestment Act dollars. So that helped drive some of this volume, but heat pump volume has continued to stay steady. It continued after that special offer ended and continues into 2022. And Sergio mentioned on the previous slide that we are in the process of creating another special offer that we intend to launch sometime either this spring or shortly thereafter to talk about, focused on renewable heating and cooling. Brian, I don't know if anything to add on your end.
That's great, Joe. Thank you for that. I guess the only other thing I would add is that for our remaining RSEP funds, the special offer is going to go towards that. But as we look ahead, if we want to continue to see the Smarty loan supporting renewable heating and cooling, we should look at the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act resources coming to Connecticut where we can buy those rates down. So continuing to do that would be great. I'm going to chat through a report that we did that kind of wraps up our use of the RSEP funds with DEEP. So let me turn it to the residential multifamily, who's going to do the update there. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Sergio.
Good afternoon. This is Mackie Dykes with the Green Bank. I could get started on these, and EDC team, feel free to jump in on anything. Not much update on the residential multifamily side. We continue to coordinate around our existing projects, Lime Loan, CPACE. Green Bank right now is particularly focused on solar in the multifamily sector, particularly the affordable multifamily. There's a process playing out at Pura now about affordable multifamily accessing the residential solar tariff. So we're participating in that, hoping for an outcome that will really open up the sector to investment in solar and make sure that the benefits from those projects are shared both with the owner, but as well as all the tenants. On the business side, we continue really to focus here on our partnership with Eversource on the Small Business Energy Advantage program. We are just putting the finishing touches on a 3-year extension. And the Green Bank has taken that to our board for approval in 2 days, on Friday, and then we hope to execute next week. There's a lot of great changes. Aside from just expanding the partnership for 3 more years, we're expanding the access to capital for the remaining 3 bullet points or sectors here on the slide. On the small business side, we're extending the available terms from 4 years to 7 years. So hopefully that'll allow for deeper measures. We're also allowing a business to take up to $1 million. That right now they're capped at $100,000 loans. We'll keep that cap in place, but we'll allow them to take out up to $1 million in those loans. This will allow businesses that have multiple locations to do loans across that portfolio where they've been limited in the past. On the medium to large business side, we're continue to sort of our work around our flagship product CPACE, as well as expanding the SBEA financing product into the BEA program. So all the benefits the small businesses will access that I just talked about, the medium to large businesses that qualify for BEA will be able to take advantage of that. On the institutional side, a lot of great changes here with the SBEA on-bill financing. The 7-year terms will be available. Looks like actually my changes didn't get captured. Must have been an older version, so ignore the numbers there because it's actually higher than that. On most municipalities will be able to access up to $5 million and 0% on-bill financing. And then the state will actually not be capped in their access to financing. We're limited by the incentives available, but in terms of what we can fund, there will be no cap, and the individual, there'll be no aggregate cap, and the individual loan caps will be $5 million. So there'll be plenty of financing available for Eversource to work with the state on. Now there's an agreement in place finally now between Eversource and the state to start doing projects. So we'll have plenty of capital available for those. I'll pause there to see if any of the EDCs have anything to add.
No, thanks, Mackie. That was great. Just wanted to say that we're looking forward to the new contract and the expanded funding capabilities and requirements for the state, the municipalities, and then the 7-year term for small business. So looking forward to getting it off the ground. And then I think just in reference to Glenn's point, working together, we're also looking forward to meeting with Bert and team with regards to opportunities to do financing for battery storage programs and things like that as well, and EV. Thanks.
Well, great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mackie. That was great. Questions, comments? We're a little over. Thank you all for sticking with us. All right. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Perfect. Thank you, Vicki.
I second it.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you. All right, everyone. Everyone have a great rest of the day. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.